You have a vast experience in that, so can you explain briefly whether we need to worry?
Okay, so it's my turn, I believe. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to this event. It's a bit challenging to talk about the experience of reforms and reversals in 10 minutes for 8 countries. If you are interested in the details, we have a research report, 100 pages on that, and I will be covering the findings. So it's not only my research, but my colleagues from Warsaw School of Economics and the University of Gdańsk. So basically, maybe a couple of words about why the funded pillars were introduced in the countries. I have to switch probably. Can I have this one? So first of all, I should stress that the pension reform was not about the introduction of funded pillars. The pension reform was, in most of those countries in 1990s and until 2000, it was about reforming the whole pension system, which was dealing with the retirement ages, with the indexation, with the benefits valuation, with the all parametric things, and sorting out the pay-as-you-go pillars. In a couple of countries like Poland and Latvia, the pay-as-you-go system, the solidarity system, was converted to a so-called NDC, so it works like as if it was the real money. The only difference is that there is no real money, but it's treated as if there is real money. In Romania, the system was introduced as a points-based system. And I dare to say, as you can see from the slide, but probably you can't see much, but basically all of those countries, the 8 countries, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, they were introducing the funded pillars. And the purpose was, I would say there were 3 purposes. One purpose was to diversify the risk in terms not to be fully dependent on the labor market in the future. When I will get retired, part of my savings, part of my retirement will come from my own money. The second purpose was, which somebody might say it's secondary, but it's also important, was to develop the local capital markets, or to strengthen the local capital markets by introducing the domestic institutional investors, such as pension funds. The third purpose was to make people aware that the pensions are not growing on the trees, that you have to save money to get the pension. That might sound obvious, but I would say that probably in many countries it was a problem. People did not understand that the pension has to be financed. So the funded pillars was something extra. The reality was that the introduction of the pillars offered too much to the people. When you ask the marketing companies to do the advertisement, the expectations were set very high. People were expecting they will be retiring at luxurious, warm countries, going, visiting, and, which is not true. Now, when you look at each country's solution, it was different in a way that the initial contribution rate for the funded pillar, as you are discussing whether it should be 2%, 7%, 15%, in various countries it was different. For instance, in Poland it was 7.3%. In Estonia it was 6%, but in some other countries it was, for instance, around 2%, and the assumption was it will be growing. What is the typical pattern for all those countries? That in practically all countries but Estonia, the contribution rate was set up as a part of the funded pillar. So it was saying, okay, 7%, we will lower the 7% by 7% the contribution in the solidarity pillar, and the 7% will go to the funded pillar. Immediately, it means that the state has the obligation, has to pay the ongoing pension benefits, which means they have to find the money for the time being. When we will be retiring, it will be fine. We will be using these savings. But for the time being, the current pensioners, they have to get their pensions, and the state has 7 percentage points less contribution. So it creates so-called transition debt. How to finance the transition debt? The idea was, well, we have 3 sources. One is the pension savings in the system. You can do something, you can make people work longer, you can eliminate the privileges. You don't have to have military, for instance, retiring at the age of 40, which was sometimes the case. You can do parametric reforms. The second source, you can increase the taxes. You can have a special tax for to counterfight the effects in the social security system. And the third was you can simply increase the debt. Also, in a couple of countries like Poland, there was an assumption that we will privatize our national property and this money will be used for financing the transitory debt. And now the question to the public is, did it work out? Unfortunately, not really. So it means that over those 10, 15 years, depending on the country, the transition debt was growing and it was financed mostly by increased national debt. It was financed by issuing treasury bonds. So, for instance, in Poland, the transition debt over 12 years was around 16% of the GDP, because that was the amount of the contributions sent to the funded pillar. The problem that seems not to be the issue for Ukraine is that if you do the extra contributions, you don't have this transition debt, but then you have the impact on the labor market, because the people might say, well, the cost of the labor is even higher. And now I'm going to the reversals, maybe finally. The main reason for the reversals was not that the returns were low, even though in some countries they were. It was more about the fiscal difficulties which resulted from the financial crisis. And simply speaking, in the context of European Union, there was some peculiar effect. Because the governments were desperately looking for the financing. For instance, the deficits, they rose from, let's say, 2-3 percentage points to 7-10 percentage points. The government had to find money. Where's the money? Oh my God, here's a lot of money in the pension funds. So, of course, you might say that's not good for the future of the retirement system, but if you have a fire in the house as a Minister of Finance, then you have a look at the savings. And what was the problem of the Central European countries being members of the European Union was that the Stability and Growth Pact was not helping very much the governments to treat the pension savings as savings. So the problem was the following from the position of the Minister of Finance. We have a huge pension debt because of this transition. So we have more treasury bonds in the market. Our debt is higher. This is debt. The European Statistical Office will say this is definitely a debt, public debt. On the other hand, you might argue, well, but we have savings, and these savings in the future will be used to finance the retirement. So the state in 20, 30, 40 years' time will have much easier situation because part of the pension expenditures will be already self-financed by the people who save the money. That looks like assets. No, it didn't. The problem was that the European statistics was not treating these assets as assets on the grounds that this is the private property and on the grounds that the individual pension fund members are exposed to the risks. So basically, it created a very powerful incentive for the finance ministers to say, well, so if I take the money from the funded pillar, use it, I will assume the future pension liabilities for the social security part, the debt will disappear. My statistical level of debt will get lower. Of course, there will be some more debt under the carpet, the implicit pension debt, but it's not visible by the European statistics. So that explains why the funded pillars were treated as a kind of skarbonka, as a kind of safety net for the ministers. When you look at the costs, when you look at the returns, of course there were plenty of issues at the macroeconomic level, but that was not the real reason for the governments to reverse. And just maybe a few words about what was the type of the reversals. Well, basically, some of the governments, like in the Baltic states, they decided to freeze the contributions. They said, okay, for the time being, we are not putting money in the funded pillar. Later, they decided to come back to the situation as before. Some of the countries, and this is the case of Hungary, and Poland, decided to either reverse it totally or partially. So in Hungary, the whole assets in 2014, I believe, 2012, they were moved to the state. In Poland, we had the situation that the contributions were lowered, and at some point, the treasury bonds part of the portfolios was retired, so the assets were reduced, and now we have the contribution rate which is lower. So we have something like the government can do something with the assets, the government can do something about the level of the contributions. The third option, the third reaction was also to make the funded pillars voluntary. So you can introduce some very smart solution that a default option for the newcomers in the labor market will be, if you don't say anything, you will be in the unfunded pillar. You will not go to the funded pillar. So I will invite you to have a look at the tables at the presentation later on. But basically speaking, what is the main, I would say, conclusion of this story is the erosion of trust. I would say the highest cost of that is not that my pension will be higher or lower, rather lower in result of that. The highest problem is that now the governments are talking about introduction of voluntary pillars, for instance, in Poland. It's a problem. The other issue is that when you substantially reduce the role of the funded pillar, it has the impact on the local financial network, because, for instance, the stock exchange might suffer. The ability of the local treasury bonds market to adapt to potential shocks becomes weaker, because then the share of the other institutional investors, usually foreign investors, increases. The domestic investors, as pension funds, is getting marginalized. So that's the issue. Obviously, we are talking about the pensions here today, but it's a very complicated issue because it's linked to the labor market, it's linked to the financial markets, it's linked also to some kind of societal issues. So with that, I will conclude. Thank you.